Hello and welcome. This is front-end development with React and Pagedraw. My name is Gabriel Guimaraes and I'm a Harvard class of 2017. I graduated in computer science and now I'm living in San Francisco working on this startup called Pagedraw. We work on automating front-end development. I'll get into a little bit more of what that means. But before we dive into that, I would like to talk a little bit about React, which is a JavaScript framework that's doing a lot of buzz in the tech community these days. React is developed by Facebook. If you want to read more, you can always go to reactjs.org. That's their official website. And it is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So the idea is if you want to build cool, awesome, modern apps, something like Facebook, something like Airbnb, they're not like static, but they have a lot of stuff going on. You should probably be looking into using something like React. To understand why React is cool, I'd like to first go into a little bit of history of these things. Okay, so the quintessential way that you learn in CS50 probably of using JavaScript. If you recall, JavaScript you can use to ship code to the client side, to the browser, to do changes that do not read to refresh the page on your browser, essentially. So if you want, for example, to click on something and have like a pop-up appear or something dynamic show up on the screen without having to refresh the page, that's probably you're using JavaScript. The way that you do that is that you traditionally do something like var in JavaScript element or root equals document.get element by ID. You pass it some ID, hello world. And then as soon as some event happens, for example, someone clicks on a button, what you do is you say root.innerHTML equals my new content. Okay, so this is kind of like the quintessential JavaScript example. And I wanted you guys to notice that this is very mutational. This is very imperative, we call it. And that's very important for understanding React, because React is kind of the opposite of that way of thinking. Why I call this mutational is that you're first fetching some element that's on the screen. Let's say, I can actually do this live here. So if I inspect element and go to the console, I can actually do this in real JavaScript, where if I type in, let's actually select this guy. If I type in 0, this is essentially selecting that element. And I can say 0.innerText equals hello world. And there you go. It changed right there using JavaScript into hello world. But this is mutational because I'm fetching some part of the screen and I'm saying, go and change it. Okay. React is a different way to do this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little tool called Create React App that just creates a React app for you. Create React App. And I'll call my app Movies. We're going to be working with movies today. Oh, there's already a directory called Movies. Let me remove it. Permission denied. Let's just call it a different thing. Movies example. Cool. So this is making sure that React is installed and is creating a directory that has all of the essentially initial files that I'm going to need to do a React app. There we go. So now we can cd into movies example. And we're going to see that we have these node modules here, which is essentially all of your libraries. There's some stuff happening. Package.json is essentially giving me some metadata about my project. But the really important folder is in source. So if you go into source, there are a couple of files here. The most important ones are this index.js and app.js. So the idea of index.js is it's very simple. It is just importing this app from /app and then calling react.dom.render. All the rest is kind of like also doing some stuff, but it's not as important as those two lines, line 4 and line 7 here. So react.dom.render is just saying render this React component called app onto the screen into this document.getElementById root. That's kind of the only mutational thing that we're going to do here in the similar style of the JavaScript that we wrote before. But app is a React component. So let's dive into what that is. So class app extends component, that's imported from React. And it's a pretty simple file that just implements a single function. So this is a class that implements this function called render. And render is the most important function in React. The idea is, instead of saying, OK, draw the screen, and then if you want something to change, you go in there and say, change it in an imperative way. What React does is it tells you to implement this render function that knows how to paint things to the screen at all times. And you can never really go in and change something explicitly or say like what we just did here where we changed this React into hello world. You can never do that. The only thing you can do is call render. And that's really interesting. So the idea is that instead of going in and changing just a little piece of the screen, you have to re-render the whole thing every single time. The history of this is kind of interesting. It might not look very compelling at first because you might be thinking, OK, if I'm re-rendering the whole screen, this sounds like kind of inefficient because I could just go in and just change that one little hello world there. And that's a lot more efficient because I don't have to re-render everything. Sure, that's true, but React can do some interesting tricks behind the scenes to make that faster for you. But the idea is that, although it might not sound very compelling at first, for really complicated apps, it is very compelling. Kind of a story of this is related a lot to game development. In games, you have a lot of stuff going on. So there's a character on the screen. The character is like moving around, and there's stuff happening. There's wind coming. There's leaves falling. There's enemies all around. It's just very, very complicated. And if you try to do things in this mutational way, where you say, for example, well, when you hit spacebar, the character is going to jump. OK, so let's go in and make the character jump. But when the character jumps, something can happen to the enemy that makes the enemy go to the right, for example, because you hit them or something like that. So one event will trigger the other event. So you get, OK, the character jumped. Now go in and mutate the enemy to make it go a little bit to the right. But the enemy going to the right can trigger another mutation that's going to make something else on the screen go to a different place. So you have like these cascading effects of one event triggering the other event, triggering the other event. It might seem reasonable at first, but if you have a very complicated app like a video game with a lot of graphics going on, all these cascading events from the point of view of a developer might become completely impossible to work with because you might find an event happening that you had no idea why it happened and what's going on and why the character just became blue and lost his hat all of a sudden because one little leaf in the left side of the screen just triggered like a huge waterfall of events like this. So the way that the game developers deal with this is that they say, OK, let's have this abstract world, OK, that doesn't have anything to do with the screen. So we don't worry about painting the screen. So we just have these abstract concepts like the character position, two numbers, x and y. OK, the enemy positions. So you might have an array that has a bunch of x and y's as well. You might have, for example, the direction of the wind. So this is kind of like just abstract numbers, just kind of in an abstract notion of everything. In React, we call this state. OK, so you have this state. And then you have this function, which in React is again called render, which knows how to get a state and paint it to the screen. And that's all basically React is. And that's basically the way that people in game development have solved these problems for many years now. And the idea is that if you want your character to jump, you don't say, hey, your pixel, you're right there. You move a little bit to the right. You don't say that. What you do is you just change the state, and then you recall render. So you change the state. You say like position x is now 50, and you recall render, and render just re-renders the whole screen. But then it's smart, so like it takes a difference between what was the last screen and what was the new screen, and then using this difference, it just updates the correct pixels. Okay, this is a lot more sane because now you can't have one event triggering the other because you can't listen. You're not listening anymore to things happening on the screen. So like, oh, one jump made some other thing happen. This is not what's happening anymore. You just do this data mutation, say the abstract data mutation, and then you get essentially a painting from that. It is really important for this reason that this render function, both in React and in this game example that we just went over, is pure, what we computer scientists call pure. Because the idea of pure is essentially that every time you call render with the same arguments, with the same state, it outputs the exact same thing. So render cannot have a thing that changes its own state in the middle of it. And that's really, really important. Because if you have changing a variable, saying, let's say that this render, in this case, it takes some state, and I'm going to add this here so you guys understand. So this is a little bit of JavaScript syntax where I'm going to initialize some state. Where I'm going to say this.state equals name equals David. Okay? And now anywhere in your render function, you can actually refer to this state. Again, this is the same analogy as like your character position. And you can say in a new paragraph, you can just open curly braces to go into JavaScript mode and say this.state.name. This is going to refer to that variable for you. And now if we actually open our app, which we probably should have done already, with npm start, this is going to run our dev server. This is our simplest of React apps. This is not allowed before super. This is more JavaScript syntax. I have to call super in the constructor. There you go. And it didn't say hello in here, so let's do hello David. So this is the probably one of the simplest React examples. So it has this welcome to React idea, and it does hello David in here with this state. Okay. And the idea is, again, if I change this state to be hello Gabriel, render didn't change, but render knows how to take a state and paint it on the screen. So it's going to paint it on the screen as hello Gabriel. And now if any event happens, let's start doing that. Let's say there's a button. Click me. Let's see if a button exists here. It does. It doesn't do anything yet. Let's make it do something. I'm going to attach an onClick handler to this button. This dot, let's say onClick me. And in JavaScript, for reasons, I have to do this dot bind this, so I can access the this variable inside of the onClickMe function. I'm going to define the onClickMe function, and what this function is going to do is just change the state. So again, same idea. If the character press spacebar, you don't change what's on the screen. You just change the position, and then render takes care of updating that on the screen. So you say this.setState name to be cats. Oops. So now this says, hello, Gabriel. If you click me, it now says hello, cats. You just literally change the state, and then it takes care of calling render for you and doing all the rest. And that's basically all there is to React. This is the core idea of everything that kind of you need to know to get going with a React app. You have some state, you have a function that's special called render. It knows how to take a state and paint it on the screen. And event handlers, like this onClick right here, can mutate the state. Note again, take a moment to notice the difference between mutating the state and actually doing that get element by ID, imperatively setting the inner HTML to cats. It would, in this case, achieve the exact same end goal, but it is different because there's a state step and then calling the render function, which for much more complicated apps is a really, really big deal. Okay? And basically, you can actually now go on and start just writing your React apps, which is really cool. This, by the way, right here is what we call JSX. It's essentially an embedding of HTML and CSS. Very similar to HTML. It's not quite HTML, but it's very close. Inside of JavaScript code. So the reason we can return this bunch of HTML inside of it of some JavaScript code is because of this language called JSX that eventually gets compiled all down to JavaScript. And that's also part of React toolchain. Okay, and this is all there is to React. So again, you have some state, you can mutate it when events happen, and then render knows how to paint things on the screen. Now, where Pagedraw comes in is essentially it takes over this render function for you. Okay, so Pagedraw automates away a lot of front-end development, but only kind of the dumb parts of front-end development. We do not want to take care of any of this on-click me logic, because this could be much, much, much more complicated than just setting a state to a different name. This could be arbitrarily complicated. What we do is we just take care of the HTML and the CSS part for you, which lives inside of your render function. Okay? So in order to do something with Pagedraw, what I'll do here is, first, let's open up our Pagedraw Dock, which is right here. And again, if you want to follow this, you can just go to documentation.pagedraw.io and click on our tutorial, which will have everything that I'm showing you today. And this is our interface, our editor. You can hit R to draw rectangles. You can hit A to draw artboards. Artboards are for us equivalent to React components. So every time you draw an artboard, you get React components. And the cool thing is that you can click on export code, and we automatically export code for this one component for you. This is JSX again, and this is CSS. I already have a sketch file that the designer in our team made earlier. If you don't use Sketch, you can just literally draw it in here, or if you're a designer and you like using Sketch already, you can just import it like I'm about to do. So today we're going to build a movie app. This is importing. Takes a second, but there it is. Cool. So I had a designer do this in Sketch where they just literally drew. Let me open up Sketch so you guys can see. Literally just drew this idea of an app for movies called Movie Time. Okay? This is, again, has nothing dynamic about it. There's no code here. This is just a static drawing. It's like you went to Photoshop or Sketch in this case, and you just draw lines and text. Okay? Now we're going to do what we call productionizing. We're going to bring this into production using Pagedraw, and I'm going to show you how to make this app come to life while using Pagedraw to implement your React render functions for you. Before we dive in, you can check out what the final version looks like. There's a movie here, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, one of my favorites. You can write comments about the movie. Hi, I love this movie. Great. And you can choose a rating for it. So this is just to showcase some of Pagedraw plus React capabilities, so you're hopefully well equipped to create something like this yourself. And if you click on the movie, it changes to another of my favorite movies, Back to the Future. Cool. So this is the app we're going to build today. So let's get started. Now, I just imported the sketch file, but again, as I said, it does not have any dynamic data. So the first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to hit D for dynamic, and I'm going to click on everything that should be dynamic, that should be coming from the database. For example, Pulp Fiction here should be dynamic. 1994 also should be dynamic. And this text, this description should be dynamic. The director name should be dynamic. This comment should probably be dynamic too. And the image are the first things that I see that are dynamic. These stars are also dynamic, but I'll get to them later. Okay? Cool. Now, what did I just do? I essentially said that these things are coming from some JavaScript. In Pagedraw, if I go to the Code tab, and I click anywhere inside of this component to select it, the Code tab is going to have a bunch of object inputs, which are essentially variables, which are your state that we automatically define for you. They're all right now of type string, except this one, which is of type image. And they have these names that are pretty standard default names that we created for you, called text, text2, text3, text4. So this is specifying, again, because in Pagedraw, this is a component, a React component, this specifies what inputs, what state that component takes in. Okay? And here is where are they used. So if I click on this text input here, it says that this.props.image_source is going to be this image. Okay? Props is a thing that definitely deserves a word. In React, I just talked about state. It turns out that there's a different thing called props that it turns out you can have multiple components. So if you have like a component 2 in React, you can actually use that inside of your render functions and do something like component 2. And the way to pass down variables from component 1 to component 2 is through props. So you can pass a variable called foo equals this.state.name, for example. And inside of the render function of component 2, you're going to be able to refer to this foo variable as, so let's actually do this definition here so you guys understand. Class app, class component 2, extends component. I'll just define a very simple render function that just does this.props.foo. And instead of passing this.state.name, I'm going to pass in, I can pass whatever JavaScript I want here. So I'm going to do hello plus CS50. Cool. So again, just showcasing the idea of props. Hello CS50 is appearing here. We're using multiple components. So this idea of props is essentially state that you can pass down to other components. You don't really need, strictly speaking, 2 components or more components, but in order to make your app easier and more reusable and more sane to work with, you probably want to separate those components and even put some in a different file, different folders, however you want. React is not too opinionated about what you do with your components or where you should place them. It's kind of like very up to you, which is really cool. All that React is doing is this state to render painting idea. And all the rest is kind of up to you, and it's just JavaScript, which I particularly really like. OK, now that we know what props are, let's go back and see what Pagedraw did there for us. So it defined that this component takes in a bunch of props. These are the types, and these are the names. And then he uses these props in all of the particular things that we clicked. So text4 is the director here. And I can actually already go ahead and change some of these names to become more sane. So text4 is going to be just director. And I'm making these up right now. Director. This guy is the movie title. Which was text. Which one was it? Text, just text. Movie title. Text 2 is the movie year. Text 5 is. Text 5 is interesting because this I actually want to make it a list. Okay. So let's actually do that before, because I want to have like multiple comments here. So the way that I do this is I can select both of the things that I want to go into the list, so this little line here and this text, and I can wrap it. This is just going to basically draw a block around it, so I can say that this block is going to repeat. And now I just click repeats here, and bam, Pagedraw is created a list for me. Again, in the code sidebar, it says this.props.list, and each item in the list is going to be called item. Pretty stupid names for now. And remember that at all times, you can always export the code and see what we're doing there for you. So for example, here we're doing this.props.movie title. And the idea is you shouldn't really care about these class names and all of this stuff. This should be kind of like a black box to you, where we're just going to import this into Pagedraw. You'll see this very soon. But if you're ever have a question about what Pagedraw is doing, you can just look at this and see, for example, this is a props.list.map. It's iterating over all of the list items and calling each of them item. Which means that in this, I posted a comment about the movie. Instead of calling it text5, I'm going to call it item.content. Because inside of that scope, I have this item element that was defined there for me. Again, nothing new here. I'm just doing this in a visual way in Pagedraw, wiring up those variables. And this props. Okay, so this is item.content. That means I'm going to have to change my object input a little bit, okay? Because it's not just a string anymore, this list. So there's this list called this.props.list, and I have to define it. Let's actually call it reviews. This.props.reviews is going to be the name of my list. So I'm going to add a new object input type. I'll call it reviews. I'm going to define its type to be list. And it's a list of objects. each object has one content, which is a string. Okay? You can define any type of object, JavaScript object, using this here. Cool. Now we're almost done naming our variables. Text 3 is the description. So I'm going to call this movie description. Text 3, movie description. Cool. So now I have this text 5, which used to be this comment, so I don't really need it anymore. I'm just going to delete it, although it would be fine to leave it there. Very cool. So we're now just done defining all of our variables. One really cool thing that we can do now is you can click on the artboard. So again, the component, select this guy here. You can also select it by, make sure you select the artboard by clicking on the title up here. And you can go into stress tester mode. So stress tester mode is essentially a mode that lets you stress test your designs. So stress testing means we're going to see how it looks like with different data, with different screen sizes, and all of that cool stuff. So you see here, we already generated some random data that we put inside of your design. May the force be with you, yo, Adrian. It went into all the things that you marked as dynamic before. And if you click randomize data up here, we change it, and you can see what happens in a different design. You can also see how it would look like with different screen sizes. And you see that this probably does not look like what you would want. You probably want some resizing behavior. It is in Pagedraw, when you bring a design in, or you draw something yourself, we don't do any responsive by default. You have to tell us what you want to do. So for example, if you want this left-hand side sidebar to expand all the way, you're going to have to tell us and click on it. By clicking on it and using these flexible checkboxes on the right, so you can specify, for example, that it has a flexible height. Click in here, and there you go. It expanded to the whole screen. You can do this also to margins and to width, but there's this very nice button up top called Infer Constraints, where we try to just do our best to infer these constraints for you. So if you click Infer Constraints, it just did something reasonable. The idea is that you click there, and then if something doesn't look like what you want, you probably work around it. So now that we've inferred these constraints, you can resize and see if this is kind of what you like. It looks pretty reasonable. You could argue for something like, oh, I want this, what did you think, aligned with the right comment, because in the original design, they were aligned. The way to do this is I can always wrap things in blocks to force them to go on together. So if I click wrap again, now I have a whole block here. And if I go back to stress tester mode and clicking on the artboard, now if I resize, they're forced to be aligned. Again, whatever you want in here. Cool. There's a nuance here, which is that this is not resizing width anymore, even though if I click on this guy, it does say flexible width, because that's what we inferred from before, because the parent block takes precedence in terms of flexibility. So if this parent is not marked flexible and the children are, you're going to ignore what the children are doing actually. So if we want this to stretch, we want to mark both the child and the parent as flexible width, which infer constraints would automatically do for us again. But there you go. If I want something like this, I just marked it as flexible. Cool? Awesome. Now, let's actually wire this into our React code base. Okay, this is a part that's very important. The idea is, again, I can click export code, and I can just copy paste this. But there's a smarter way, because if I'm constantly altering my design, just copy pasting this becomes very bothersome. So what I can do is I can check this button here which says should pull and sync from the CLI. It turns out we have a Pagedraw command line interface, and if you look at our documentation, you can read all about it here, and you can just install it by doing npm install-g Pagedraw CLI. I already have it installed, so I have to do a couple of things. First one is I have to create a pagedraw.json in my root directory right next to the package.json. And it just needs one entry. That one entry is called app. And it just says the name of the app that I'm working with, the Pagedraw app. So we know where to fetch files from. So the name of my app is up here. It's called Movie Tutorial. Quotes are wrong. Cool. My app is called Movie Tutorial. Now that I have this file, I can just say Pagedraw Pool, and it's going to download and place these desktop hd.jsx and CSS all inside source/Pagedraw, which is our default directory for placing files. You can override this by going to the editor and changing file paths. Okay. This is just doing this pull once. If I wanted to constantly keep syncing, I can say Pagedraw sync instead, and it's going to just keep listening for changes in the dock and keep constantly fetching them and putting them in my file system. Cool, so I'll just leave this Pagedraw sync here for now. So I have Pagedraw sync running, I have npm start running, which is my local dev server. So now if we go into app.js, we can actually get rid of all of this render stuff, because Pagedraw is going to do this for us again. And get rid of component 2. I don't need any more CSS. I don't need any more logo images. And I can just import, I'll call this app render. I could call it banana if I wanted to, from /pagedraw/ and again, the name of the file is desktop HD. Desktop HD. And now my render function becomes just one line, which is really cool. App render, return. Awesome. So if I go here, bam, I'm getting errors. What are these errors? Well, so app did require the Pagedraw component correctly. It is returning as app render. Everything is correct. But remember that we defined all of those dynamic things. So it's trying to access this props or reviews that we defined in there. But we're never passing down reviews into app render right here. So I can just say reviews equals whatever. And sorry, you need curly brace. Just like an empty list. So there you go. Now that we have reviews, we have 0 comments, we have essentially undefined for everything else. So we are rendering the page, it just doesn't have any data yet. So I already have all of this data actually in a different file, so I'm just going to bring it from there because this part is not very interesting. Yep. So this is just, again, doing the same thing we were doing before by creating some state with all of those variables that we defined. And the idea with Pagedraw is, again, that front-end development becomes a lot more like back-end development, where my job as a developer is to deal with data and not at all worry about whether something is blue or is it in the middle of the screen or to the right of the screen. Like, that should be like basically black boxed away from me. I just deal with data. I fetch data from a database. I create data. And if some events happen, I change that data. And that's all my job as a developer should be. And Pagedraw takes care of doing essentially the painting part for you. So let's copy all of this in. Actually, I just need these guys. So that's state. It says title here, but it's actually movie title that I want. And now I'm going to return this app render, which is pretty stupid. It's just like passing down all of these state things into the render function like we did before. So this title, image source, it has a few other things that I'm going to add later, like this comment being typed, on change. I'm going to add all of these later. Let's just focus on the stuff that we have so far. App render, and I need to finish with \, that's JSX syntax. Reviews, movie year, director. I call that actually movie title instead of title. Stage.movie title. Cool. Now, reviews doesn't exist. Reviews is supposed to exist. Oh yeah, I didn't bring the reviews. Reviews. And again, reviews is a list of a bunch of objects of type content. Cool. Now we have, and again, now I just decided that actually I wanted the write a comment to not go down there, and probably this image is stretching in a weird way, so I can always go back to Pagedraw. And the cool thing now, because I have Pagedraw Sync running, is if I do some change where I decide, for example, that this big block doesn't exist anymore and I want these two to be separated, I just delete it, and it should already refresh automatically, and there you go. But still, my image looks a little bit funky here. So what I probably want is there's different ways of choosing how an image is going to fit the block. So instead of stretch, I'm going to say contain, which I think in this case is going to be a little bit more sane. There we go. Cool. So it looks better. And now, OK, so we have an app that just knows how to paint things on the screen. And this is, again, all done by Pagedraw. It's really cool if I can change if I want to change the color here, I can just click here, and it's already going to reload and change there. Very cool. So the idea, again, is Pagedraw takes over a render function. Now our job is just to do some state mutations. The last part that we need to do is make this actually dynamic, where this comment thing, I can't really type here or add any comments yet, and I can't do the star functionality. So let's do the comment idea first. So in React, because everything is state, first we have to turn this into a text input so the user can type. So right now this is some text because we imported it from Sketch, and this is just text there. So I'm going to change the block type into text input, and the placeholder is going to be your comment. And I'm going to unstyle this text input. It just comes with some default styles. I'm going to say it has 0 border, and its fill color is completely transparent. And if I check in my Sketch file, I'm pretty sure that the size of the font was 18, I think. Yep, 18. So I'm just going to type in 18 for the font size. It's a little bit, I would like that to be aligned to the left, just like the Sketch file, actually. So you can also click on Use Custom Padding, and padding left 0. There we go. Cool. Now this is an actual text input. If I go to my React app, I can type in here. Oh, the color is dark. I probably don't want that. Let's do something like white for the text color. Cool. That's what I want. But just typing here doesn't do anything yet. Like it doesn't really add anything to my reviews array because we're not doing any state mutations. So cool. So the way that React does this is a little bit interesting and a little bit different for some people that are coming from a not React background. So the idea is, right now we're violating the React fundamental paradigm. Why is that? We are violating the React paradigm because you see that something is changing on the screen when I type here, but there's no state changing. Okay. And this is basically going against what React is. Because the idea is that, again, it should be a pure function, that every time you have the same state, you should get the exact same painting of the screen. But right now we have one state, we didn't change it at all, and we have different paintings when I'm typing something here. So the first thing I have to do is I actually have to turn this into some state so I can refer to it later to basically fetch this comment. So the way to do this is, well, I'm going to first, in my code, add some comment being typed state that starts as nothing, starts empty. And I'm going to pass it down to App Render, just like everything else. Comment being typed equals this.state.comment being typed. Cool. And now I just have to use this in Pagedraw to say that that's what's going to be the value in there. The way to do this is on the sidebar, in the same way that we did D for dynamic earlier, I can actually hover over a bunch of these things like placeholder, and I get this little icon right there that says make dynamic. So I can make anything in Pagedraw dynamic, like the font size, the font color, the background color, whatever you want. In this case, I want to make the value, which is the text that's going to be inside of this text input, dynamic. As soon as I make something dynamic, and now if I go to the code sidebar, I actually get a new text input value that needs some variable to go in here. And we highlighted in red for you, so you know that it's empty. But now this is going to come from this .state, or this .prop, sorry, .comment being typed. Cool. If I reload my React app, and now if I try to type here, oh, it's changing. It shouldn't. Let's see. Cool. So I'm trying to type here. It does not let me type. Why is this happening? Because now we're not breaking the React paradigm anymore. Because now we have a state that comes into the value of this text input. The state is comment being typed is empty. And never do I say comment being typed changes. So that's why you never see any comment here, which is kind of interesting and kind of unintuitive for people coming to React at first. But this is a really powerful idea, again, this idea of state should define completely what your screen looks like. So now I need to add an event handler that every time someone types a letter, say A, it should change comment being typed from nothing to A. The way to do this is in Pagedraw, you can click on any block to define event handlers. In the draw sidebar at the end, you see this array here of event handlers. You can just click plus and say whatever event handler you want. And this is, we just support all the React event handlers. You can go to React.js to see all of the event handlers. They're basically wrappers on top of the browser's event handlers. So instead of on click, I'm going to do actually on change. Okay? And here I just say the name of the function that I want. This.props.onChange comment. I just chose the name of the function. So now let's actually implement this. I can get rid of the onClickMe that we were using earlier and just say onChange comment. And I'll actually just copy this from here so I don't forget the syntax. This is very simple. The idea is that every time there's an onChange event happening, I get that event, I take its value, and I update using this state the comment being typed to be that new value. And that's all it is. This is standard React, by the way. This is nothing Pagedraw specific. Pagedraw just allows you to attach these React event handlers to things. This is the exact same thing that you'd be doing if you're just using normal React. And again, the idea of Pagedraw is that Pagedraw does not change your React workflow, basically. It just fits right into the render function. All the rest should look exactly like it would look like your backend, your event handlers, your state management should look exactly like without Pagedraw, but with React. Okay. That means we don't import any like weird libraries, anything. We're just like importing React here, which is really important to note. Okay. On change comment then. Now we get back to where we were, where if I type something, I should probably refresh. Why is it? Oh yeah, I never passed it down to the render function, to the app render component. So on change comment equals this dot on change comment. And I have to do that weird bind this again, because so I have access to the this keyword inside of this function. Cool. Now I can type again, but this time looks exactly the same as before. But every time I type something, we're actually updating the internal React state, which is a huge deal because now we can actually access this.state.comment being typed anywhere we want, which is what we want to do next. The idea is that whenever we click on this plus button here, we want to query what is the comment being typed and add it to this list. Let's just do that right now. I will first make this blue icon in Pagedraw have a cursor. So whenever someone hovers over it, it's going to be a different, like a pointer thing. Let's see. There you go. Cool. That's just a style thing. And I'm going to attach an event handler, this time on click, that does this dot props dot on add comment. And again, I'm making these up as I go. So add comment. I'm going to copy this in again, but it's pretty straightforward. And it's on add comment is what I called it. And I'll pass it down to the component just like I did before, on add comment. This dot on add comment dot bind this. Okay, this function is pretty straightforward. All it's doing is it's updating the reviews, our state. And maybe if you have a real app, it should be like going to the database and changing that into the database. Right now, we just have things in memory in this big this.state array, which is fine. And it's concatenating to this.state.comment, the this.state.comment being typed into it. Okay, so it's getting this new reviews, and then it's setting the state of reviews to be new reviews. And it also sets the state of comment being typed to be nothing. If we don't do that, we would add it to the reviews list, but you wouldn't essentially erase what you were typing, which would be slightly awkward from a user perspective. Cool. So now, if we go back to our app, you can type hello CS50 and click plus, and I think it didn't refresh. Hello CS50. Something is happening. On add comment, on add comment. I have 3 M's in comment. I think I just spotted the bug. Thank you very much, Dan. So I think my problem from before is that I was passing on add comment with 3 M's. That is totally my bad. Okay, I think now things should be working, hopefully. So now, let's first test the other one. Click here. There we go. Sweet. So now the props, I mean, if you get the names right, which I didn't, whenever you click on this, that function is going to be called, which is going to set the state of a new review reviews list, which is what we wanted. Hey, this is working. But now we just got two event handlers that are hopefully working. That was one. And if I now click on this guy, it changes the movie. I didn't change the title. It's still Monty Python because I'm setting the state to just title, but I actually use the name movie title in this example. So let's refresh, make sure that works. So click on that. It goes to another one of my favorite movies. Cool. And again, this is just attaching event handlers, and the event handlers are implemented outside of Pagedraw in good old React, which is just JavaScript. I don't need this console.log anymore. Cool. Now, remember that I set an event handler here when I was debugging. I'm just going to delete that. I don't want that part to do on add comment anymore. And every time you're good in like a good state, let's say we're in a good state right now, we like this, you can commit. You see up here we say we have uncommitted changes. So if you select the dock by unselected any block on the screen, you see all of my commits previously here, and I can say good state for CS50. Yay. And click commit. This way, if someone screws up your dock, whatever, changes something, oh my god, I just lost everything, you can click restore, and it's going to go back to your good state. So we're happy about that. Cool. Another little thing that just showed up and some people get confused by is if you have 2 blocks overlapping in Pagedraw, we show red lines like that to basically alert you that if you have overlapping blocks, we can do them if you want. We're just going to have to do position absolute in CSS, which might not be what you want. So we warn you to see if you really want that. And often when you bring sketch files in, if they're not super polished, they often come with these things, because in Sketch it doesn't really matter if you have things overlapping. So one of the steps is also to fix all of those overlapping things, just so you know to look for this. Cool. Now the last thing I want to do is implement this little star component widget right here. And again, I just want to have like a rating that will let the user select the rating. Okay? And notice that we have 3 states that this star can be in. Either this is a state of hovering, the blue one, this is a state of unfilled, and this is a state of filled. So in order to do this in Pagedraw, in order to do this in code, you do it with an if, essentially, where you say if this is filled, like do something here. In Pagedraw, you do what we call a multi-state component. So again, you can create components in Pagedraw and reuse them either in Pagedraw or in your outside code. The way you create a multi-state component is you select the 3 or 4 or 5 or 2 or whatever you want states and click Make Multi-State. So this created this multi-state group up here that has 3 artboards. It's a little bit awkward because the background colors are not the same. Let me copy this background color right here, because you can't see the star because the background color is white and the star is also white. This background color here is just being ignored because it's transparent. So so we can see the star. There you go. You can also see the star here. Cool. The other one I can already see. Sweet. So now we created these 3 states for you inside of the multi-state group. And Now these three things are all instances of this component. And if you want to create instances of this component, what you can do is you just click add. And add here, you can add all artboards, text, rectangles, all of these primitives in Pagedraw. But you can also add your own primitives, which were defined by you. So desktop HD is, again, one of component that you define, because every time you create an artboard, you're defining a component. And multi-state group is another such instance that you can create. So let's actually create desktop HD to see what that looks like. This one's going to be big, so I'm going to put it here. This is not going to be useful very much as a component, because I don't want to reuse this anywhere. But it can be useful as a preview. So right now, you see that the props here are the ones that we defined earlier. And I can just click Generate Random Props, where it just fills them up for me. But I can change the movie title to whatever I want. Pulp Fiction, if I want to. And here, this is, again, another way to have a preview without having to go back and forth. If you want, you can just stay in Pagedraw and have this preview. More interesting use case of components, they're not previews, is actually embed an instance inside of another component, which we're already doing automatically for these three guys, but we didn't do it for the other two guys because we never selected them. So I'm going to create, and I can do this either by adding or by copy pasting these guys. So I'm going to copy paste this star and replace the other star with it. And I'm going to paste another one and replace this last star also with it. Cool. Now notice that all of these guys automatically, because we created it as a multi-state component, already have a prop, again, an input prop. Prop and input should be kind of the same thing for you, called state. And I can choose to go between default, state 1, and state 2. You can change those names later if you want. So right now I'm going to do state 1, which is the unfilled. And this one is also going to be state 1. Cool. Now if we go to our React app, you should see that reflected there, but still there's no functionality. So I want two things. I want, one, hovering should make it blue. Two, I need to have a rating that defines which of them are filled or not. Hover is very easy with Pagedraw. You can just call the state that you want hovered, its name. You can use sometimes it's hard to select a block because it selects a different one. When you click here, you can use the layer list to select the exact block that you want. In this case, I'm selecting the artboard called state 2. And you can click here to change its name to state 2 : hover. This is going to make Pagedraw automatically pick this up and make it hover state. Where now, if we go here, bam, it's already, whenever I hover, I already see the blue star. Cool. The final thing that we want to do is have a variable called ratings. Again, I don't want to have one variable for each of the stars. I just want to have one rating, which is a number from 0 to 5, and then I'll translate that into whether each of the stars is filled or not filled. So first thing, in my constructor, I'm going to add kind of my final variable here called rating, and it's going to start as 3, and I'm going to pass it in. Again, everything that I'm passing in here is so I can have access inside of Pagedraw, because you have to think of Pagedraw as your render function. This.state.rating. Cool. That's all I need here. And in Pagedraw, if I click on each of these guys, you see that, again, they have a state. And I can trigger between the states. But states also can be made dynamic, which is what I want to do here, because these states are going to be dynamic based on the rating variable. So I'll click here, make it dynamic. I'm going to make all of them dynamic. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now if I go to the code sidebar, you should be able to guess now we have 5 code inputs to fill up, one for each of the stars. And this is essentially saying what is the Boolean that's going to define the state. This has to return some state here. And a state is a string that's essentially the name, default versus state 1. You could change those names if you wanted to, but I'm not going to right now. So I'm going to say that this guy, well, the first one, where's the first one? The first one is this. So this.props.rating greater than 0. If that's true, I'm using a ternary operator here. Do state 1, else do default. Cool. Now I'll do the same thing for each of these, but with different ratings. So this guy is 0, 1, 2, 3. 3. This guy's 2. This guy is 1. And this guy is 4. So now it's essentially returning either state 1 or default, depending on what my rating is. And this is weird. I think I did the opposite. Stop props dot rating greater than 1. I'll do state 1. Oh yeah, I actually want to default is filled, so I got this backwards. Sorry. State 1. We'll copy paste again. 2, 3, 0, and 4. Let's see now. There you go. So 3 is the rating. If I change my rating here in the constructor to 1, it should hopefully reflect in my app to be 1 star. Perfect. Now the final bit is that if I click on a star, I want to change the rating. By now, you already know how to do that. The way to do it is to attach an on-click handler to each of these stars. Very simple. So my on-click handler, again, in the draw sidebar here, I can do event handler on-click. This one is going to be a little bit more interesting than the others because I can't just say this.props.set ratings or something like that, because I need to know what to set ratings to, and it depends on which star it is. I could have 5 functions for each of the stars, but that would be kind of not ideal. So what I want to do is actually have a function that wraps this thing here. That syntax is just wrapping it in a function. And again, anything here can be arbitrary JavaScript. Just like in a code sidebar, you can put arbitrary JavaScript in there, it's going to work. We don't want you to put, we don't advise you to put a lot of JavaScript in there, but just keep it simple. So this is wrapping in a function, so I can do this as set rating to 1. And I'll copy paste this, add more event handlers on click. This is a props of set rating 2. And I'll just do the same thing for all of them. Set rating 3 on click. There we go. Set rating 4 on click. On click. Rating 5. Cool. Now I need to implement the set rating function. Turns out I already have it implemented here. Set rating n, just very simple. I'll show you in a second. Set rating n just sets the state of rating to be n. Very straightforward. And now the last bit, if you've been following, you know we have to pass it into our render function. Set rating equals this dot set rating dot find this. There you go. Now, if I click on any star, it changes the rating. Awesome. So there we go. This is our React plus Pagedraw app. We can click on stars. We can change the movie. There's only 2 movies right now, but you can imagine having a lot more. And you can add comments to your movies. This movie is awesome. And it's working. Very cool. I hope this made sense to all of you. So now a few questions, a few follow-ups on top of what we just talked about. First one is, if you're a CS50 student, you're probably thinking about, okay, I just learned like Python and JavaScript, and now like there's this React thing, and how does this all tie together? And it's an interesting idea how to like tie in together like the Python stuff that you guys did in your problem sets to this context, because in here we do not have any backend, so we do not have any Python running or anything like that. We just have a very simple app that just has front end, and the state is living in the front end here. What we probably want is a database that has some backend on top of it, which it could be in Python, could be in Ruby, whatever you want. And the idea is that this dot state, instead of just having these static values, you would actually, in this JavaScript, you would actually talk to the server. So you'd have a bunch of what we call endpoints or an API, where you talk to the server by querying, oh, what is the current movie that the user is seeing? And if the user adds a comment, you go and say, hey, database, please update this. So there's a little bit of work that you do with the JavaScript here using Ajax and technologies like that to connect this code to your backend that you probably have. The idea here is that Pagedraw does not have anything to do with this. Neither does React, frankly. This is just JavaScript, and it should be, it's kind of up to you how to do that as you see fit. Cool. Some follow-up questions. So again, if you've been following and you wanna do the exact same that we did, this demo that we did today, you can go to pagedraw.io and just click on login. You get redirected to a Google sign-in, and you can just sign in with any Gmail account. But you might find more helpful to go to documentation.pagedraw.io. That's kind of where we explain a lot of the stuff that I've been explaining. We have references to the React page as well, Pagedraw CLI, this tutorial, which I'm going to update with the sketch file that I just used here as well. Again, automating front-end development. Pagedraw is made to make, a lot of people think that it's good for building static landing pages, but as you guys have hopefully seen, it's actually good for building dashboards, for building things as complicated as like the Facebook newsfeed, which we have done actually in Pagedraw. As a matter of fact, Pagedraw itself is done in Pagedraw, which is kind of cool. So this editor, for example, I can show you guys. We also did in Pagedraw. This part here that you see in the top bar is exactly implemented here. Again, you see there's a multi-state component, and each of these calls a component called top bar button that also is multi-state, so it has 3 states, active, hover, and so on. There's this list to add things right here, and you see it right in here. So you can, in fact, use Pagedraw to create as complicated UIs as you can imagine. And a very good question before is if you want to use some functionality from other React components, you can always do that, override code to add custom components as you see fit. Now some FAQs. What if Pagedraw doesn't support something I want to do? Well, I just talked about how using custom components. The idea is that Pagedraw should support basically everything that HTML and CSS supports, although some of it is kind of hidden right now, and we're working to make that interface more clear and to add more things to the documentation. But you can always, probably the most important button in Pagedraw today is this little button right here. If you click here and you can type whatever message, you can talk to me or to any of us working in Pagedraw right now, and we'll help you with whatever problem you have. This has been super useful for a lot of people building apps with Pagedraw and React. And odds are, so we have some support for what you want to do, but if you really don't, you're not at all, you always have a way to do what you want by doing custom components using override code. Second question, can I manually edit the code of Pagedraw exports? Should also be pretty clear by now, but the answer is no. As we've seen with Pagedraw sync, we keep syncing, and that code that we export should be treated as a black box, except in some debugging cases, which actually we're building some stuff on top of Pagedraw to also help you debug these things, which would probably have caught my comments with 3Ms earlier today. But yes, you can not manually edit the code, because if you do manually edit the code, we're going to Pagedraw sync on top of it, and the next time you export, it's going to override all of your changes that you manually did. And can I collaborate with friends on the same project? For sure, especially for CSS final projects. This is a great setup. You can work with your friends because this is all live collaborated. So you can go here to the dashboard and add collaborators to your project. And everyone can go into the same doc and actually edit it live, kind of similar to Google Docs style, where multiple people are collaborating together. Do you want support for other frameworks, languages, and some cool not so tested features like Angular, Vue.js, or some backend languages as well like Python, Jinja? We do have that, although it's hidden behind config flags. So you can email us at team@pagedraw.io and we can set you up if you want to do that. Getting help, this is really useful. We can help you on React, Pagedraw, JavaScript, whatever you're having trouble with. There's a Facebook group. You can just follow this. We'll hopefully post these slides online afterwards, where people help themselves. And then their team@pagedraw.io, documentation website that I showed you guys, and of course that little message button right here, which is really useful. Finally, if you're interested in Pagedraw, if you're interested in making web development better, and you're looking for a job, you can also always email us. We're hiring full-time engineers or designers, and that's basically it right now. Yes, if you're a full-time engineer or a designer and you're interested, definitely email us at jobs@pagedraw.io. There we go. Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you guys use Pagedraw and React to build awesome things. Thank you very much.